lifeguard was holding swimming lesson classes at a community pool, and it was the first session of what would be several sessions for this group. And so she has several participants in the class lined up, and they're mostly all children. And as you can expect, they're all in the shallowest end of the pool, or at least on the side of the pool of the shallowest end. And she notices there is a gentleman there who she assumes is the parent of one of the children, but he has on a swimsuit, so it's a little odd. And when she says it's time to get into the pool, he's on the far end, they're on the shallow end. They begin to get in the pool, and he slides into the deep end, but doesn't come to the surface. And she looks and notices that he's still not coming to the surface. So she dives in, pulls him out, brings him to the side, and he's fine, gasping for air, but he's fine otherwise. And she's kind of beginning to question him, and he says, I tell you, your pool is quite confusing. It'd be nice to know that was the deep end. So he was a man who couldn't swim, and he jumped in the deep end. And he said, sir, there's signs all around. You see the big number 10. That means it's 10 feet deep. And she said his demeanor changed, and he felt embarrassed. And he said, I thought that was for the ages. He thought that was 4 and under, and that this was 10 and up. And he was in the right section, but he thought he was going to be able to touch the bottom. If you're going to swim in a pool, that has a deep end, you've got to define your relationship to the deep end. One author talks about our passage this morning, Matthew 16, beginning of verse 24, in relationship to the transition from the shallow end to the deep end. His point is this, that when you begin to move from the shallow to the deep, and especially if you're a little skittish, if you don't know how to swim the greatest, but you're wanting to go to the deep end, you might almost instinctively put your feet on the bottom of the pool. That keeps you safe in the shallow end. You begin to go down that ramp as it goes to the deep end, and you keep your feet on the bottom of the pool. There is a breaking point, isn't there? If you keep your feet on the bottom, what you thought was the safe thing now becomes the unsafe thing. You could be at certain points of that ramp, you could be fully in the deep end, and if you have your feet on the bottom of the pool, the water is now above your head, and you'll soon drown. The safe thing in the deep end is not what feels to be the safe thing, but it's to let go, it's to trust, it's to have learned to breathe and swim on the top of the water. The more we live by the flesh, the more we think with the flesh, the more we think like the world. The more we are drawn to this idea of self-preservation. That whenever we're threatened, whenever we feel anxious, the first step, the first level is to always be safe, to always feel safe, to do what's easiest. We might hear it even summarized to say we follow our hearts or follow our instincts. As we finish out chapter 16 of Matthew, what we find is that Jesus says, when you choose to follow me, the one thing you cannot do is to choose to do the safe thing. You can follow me or you can follow your heart, but you cannot do both. Before we dive into verse 24, it's worth remembering the previous section is Jesus rebuking Peter after Peter tries to rebuke Jesus for saying he's going to die. Jesus says, Peter, you've put yourself in a position to be a stumbling block for me carrying out God's will. You've gotten out in front of me, is the idea. You might think you're trying to protect me by being in front of me, but you're actually trying to hinder me. It's the very next recorded words of Jesus where he says, come after me and follow me. Jesus is reminding us and making it clear that the only suitable relationship to Jesus is to follow after him. It's not out in front trying to pave the way for Jesus. It's not trying to be a protector of Jesus. It's not to be on the sidelines as a spectator of the life of Jesus, but it's to follow after him closely. as unsafe as that will be to do. Let's read together beginning verse number 24. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Observation number 1 comes from the first half of verse 24. First, we must see that discipleship, or following after Jesus, or being trained like Jesus, it's an offer. If anyone would. About half the translations use a derivative of wants or wishes. So the ESV says, if anyone would. Some translations would say, if anyone wants to or wishes to come after me. Jesus has given them time. He started all this by saying, come and see. And now he has taught, he has performed miracles, he has loved them, he's challenged them, he's taught them. And now he's saying, you have enough information to decide if you're going to follow me or not. If you choose to follow me. We often think about how it's an offer. We don't have to follow Jesus. We can give our lives to any other number of things. He offers us, allows us to come after him and to follow him. The offer is for everyone, and yet no one has to accept it. In one respect, it's this verse that's one of the most challenging verses in all the New Testament, and it is also one of the most loving because he makes it clear he will not force us to do anything. Love allows for choice. What's not our choice, though, is the means by which we follow him. That's what he's spelling out here. You followed me to this point, but now there are some hesitations. Now there are some questions. There are some gaps in understanding about what it means to follow me. So now he's saying, when you choose to follow me, and if you choose to follow me, you must be clear what's expected when you follow me. You've got to deny self, take up your cross, and follow me. But at the first level, it's a choice. He wants us to follow him. But he also wants us to know what we're agreeing to and what we're deciding to follow him into when we do choose to follow him. Look at the very next verse, verse 25, same language. For whoever would, same exact verb. Whoever wants to save his life. Whoever wishes to save his life. And it's there that you see an intentional contrast. It's self-preservation versus self-denial. If you're on a boat and it's beginning to be overtaken by the waves, your instinct will be to save yourself. Do you want to save yourself or not makes the difference. Or if you're trapped in a car vehicle after an accident, will you want to save yourself? He's saying, when it comes to me, what do you want most? Do you want to preserve yourself or do you want to follow me? Because it's that desire that's the starting point. Do you choose? Do you choose to take me up on my offer, and will you do it on my terms? That's the leading question in all of this. You remember how chapter 16 begins? Sadducees and the Pharisees have come to him. They say, show us a sign from heaven. Prove it. We don't quite put everything together like you present it, so just answer our question once and for all. Give us a sign from heaven. Jesus doesn't do that. What he's doing for his disciples here and for all who will listen is to say, you have seen and heard enough. Now will you follow me to where I'm going? Based on the data and the information, will you choose to act on that information? If you're still wanting more, if you still think you need more, if you're still not sure, if you still have some things you need to shore up back home before you follow me, you really don't want to follow me. The final observation about this idea is the beauty of the offer. We're going to see later there are promises about the near future and the eternal future. But there's something also inherent about following Jesus that's beautiful, and that is to become more and more like him. That's what it means to follow him. In Luke's account, Luke chapter 6, verse 40, he says a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Disciple is one who's been trained. When he is fully trained, he looks like, he sounds like, he goes where his master went and talked and ended up. So as we think about this principle of following him, that being the definition of a disciple, there's an easy way, if you were alive in the first century, in the time of Jesus, there would be an easy way to identify whether or not you, quote, followed Jesus. And that is, do you end up where he ends up? When he is in Capernaum, and then he leaves there to go to, say, Bethany. Are you in Bethany or are you in Capernaum? Or do you stop off along the way somewhere else? Or do you go off to other cities along the way and you're not really with Jesus, but you just kind of claim him from a distance? He offers us, but he does not control us and force us to be his disciple. And when we choose to follow him, we become more and more like him. Are we living by the same choices that he made? Are we treating people the way he treated other people? Are we ordering our hearts and our steps after the pursuit of the will of the Father just as he did? The second observation comes from the rest of verse 24, that discipleship is radical. It's an extreme definition of what it means to follow after Jesus. This is the emphasis in the text. This is our emphasis for our study this morning. 3 specific commanding verbs. If you're going to follow me, here are the 3 things that you must do. It's familiar to us, but it is the most challenging of statements that we can imagine. Anyone can choose, but everyone who does choose to follow Jesus must do so by doing these things. Here are the conditions. Number 1, deny self. Obliterate you. Obliterate yourself, your own desires and wishes as your decision-making apparatus. What makes your decisions? Is it you? Is it what you want? Is it what you feel? Is it what you've been taught by others? Or is it going to be somewhere else? Deny self. Remember later when Jesus is arrested, he's going to tell Peter, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. When Peter ends up denying Jesus, what's the phrase he uses to say that he's denying him? He says, I do not know the man. He's lying. He does know Jesus. But in denying Jesus to the crowds, Peter says, I do not know him. So when we do decide and choose to follow after Jesus, and he says it's going to demand that you deny self, what then becomes our relationship to old me? What becomes your relationship to old you? I do not know that person. I don't know him. I don't know her any longer. I'm denying who I used to be. I'm denying who I might want to be. All for the sake of following after Jesus. Ephesians 4:22, Colossians 3 and verse number 9, they use the phrase to put off the old self. And they use that, Paul uses that phrase in those texts to lead into a list of things that need to stop, sins that need to be repented of. But the driving image is to put off the old self so that the behaviors then begin to change and to follow. Listen to strong language along these same lines. Luke chapter 14. If anyone comes to me, that's following language. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, and sisters, yes, notice the last one, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Deny self. Jesus says before you can ever begin to follow, you have to first hate anyone or anything, including yourself. Meaning, you have to love me more than you love them. That if there's ever a competition, if there's ever a hierarchy, you're always going to put me and following me as the number one guiding value. It will be what makes your decisions for you. Same idea, Luke chapter 13. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. When we decide to choose who we're going to follow, we're also deciding and choosing to deny every other option as the one who will lead us. We're also deciding to, quote, hate, to love less every other option. So when Jesus starts out and says, here's what it takes to follow me, he says, first, deny self. It's possible. And this is true for any era of time, any culture, any country, but it's especially pronounced right now. It's possible we could believe that we are our own most valuable asset. This will get done as long as I do this. I can pull this off. I can win the day. I can work hard. And Jesus says that's not the most important thing in following me. Denying the selfish ambition and denying the self-sufficiency is the first step in order to follow after me. But the next verb, the next imperative, it's a command, is to take up my cross. I have to deny myself and I have to take up my cross. This was shocking, explicit almost language for the disciples. We know, looking back, that Jesus dies on the cross for us, so it sounds familiar. We have a mental picture already in our minds. But for them, and even in this setting, just the previous paragraph, he has said he would go die at the hands of the Jews, but he doesn't specify by means of crucifixion. So you can see how some of them would have really been caught off guard. What in the world is he doing talking about that extreme form of execution? Now, the mental picture is of the person who would carry his own cross to his execution. Now, likely, it would have been just the horizontal crossbar. Almost all the modern kind of pictures of it or drawings of it would have it, as the whole cross. But it probably was just the crossbeam. They already had the vertical ones just kind of permanently set. But it was still heavy. Maybe 80 pounds, maybe 100 pounds. It would have been rough. They wouldn't have taken the time to sand it. So you have the potential for splinters. It demands all of your attention to carry your own means of execution. Now, it's going to drain you physically because of its weight, but it is also very humiliating from an emotional standpoint. You're not humiliated only once you get nailed to the cross. When you've got to carry this beam from the place where your judgment is handed down to the place where you're going to be executed, you've got to carry the very thing that you're going to die on. And you're sending this loud message to everyone who sees, this person is a criminal. This person is a lower level, a low status criminal. They tried to be a revolutionary. They tried to be a usurper. They were a robber. They were a thief. They were a murderer. They were a runaway slave, perhaps. And so you're sending this message to everyone who sees you. Look how terrible I've been. So there's shame that's associated with it. For Jesus to say, before you can follow me, he does not say, take up your weapon. He says, take up your cross. He's already told them he's going to go to Jerusalem and die. And if they're going to follow him in going to Jerusalem, he's saying you've got to have the same mindset that says you're willing to die and you're going to die just the same. To approximate this shock and this feeling of embarrassment, humiliation, it's not simply that he talks about this form of capital punishment, but because he's also talking about just this incredibly humiliating and intentionally intimidating form of capital punishment. There are terrorist organizations and cartels and gangs around the world who do not care one bit about international laws or federal laws about humane executions. But sovereign states typically abide by those laws. Jesus is pulling in some of these inhumane, horrific treatments that the Romans did, but they were the ones carrying it out. It was a state-sponsored, state-carried-out execution. It was kind of the combination of both worlds. And Jesus is saying, you're going to have to join in this type of suffering if you're going to follow after me. Notice how Paul connects. You almost have to think Paul is thinking about this statement when he writes Romans 6 and verse 6. We know that our old self, deny self, was crucified with him. Take up your cross in order that the body of sin might be brought to nothing. See, there's a purpose in behind it. You can't follow Jesus and remain in sin, but when you deny self and you crucify self, now you're freed. You're no longer enslaved to that sin, but you're now able to follow after him. Going back to that idea of carrying your own cross, the weight, the exhaustion, the humiliation. Think about how when we did that, and if we were doing that physically, how that would impact our physical actions. Just think about what you could and could not do during the course of a typical day if you're carrying an actual literal beam around with you everywhere you go. There'd be some places that you might want to go or ordinarily would want to go, you just can't carry the cross with you. There might be some people you would love to talk to otherwise, or that you would get into a relationship with, but you know that once you have that cross with you, I can't really be in the same room with that person. How easy would it be to hold your phone and hold the cross at the same time? A little bit of a modern take on that. The more we think about what Jesus says, the first fundamental steps, deny self, take up cross, do you see how it now impacts every single decision? It's not self who's making all the decisions. It's crucified self. It's crucified Savior who's beginning to change our thinking, who's making our decisions, who's guiding us, and we're following after him wherever he leads. Of course, the third command is to follow him. If you're going to come after me, you've got to decide. I'm commanding you, deny self. I'm commanding you, take up your cross. I'm commanding you, actually take the steps and follow me. We must keep remembering that only Jesus would make these commands of us. He is the source. He is the spiritual guide in all of this. This knowledge doesn't come from anywhere else. It cannot come from anywhere else. He's the only one who has the heart, a complete heart of purity in seeking to carry out the will of the Father. Therefore, he is the only one we can trust to do the same. When we listen to others for what it means to know Jesus or to quote, follow Jesus, it'll never be as extreme as what Jesus has taught here himself. The paths that others might say, here's what it means to claim Jesus or to know him, will always include comfort, path of least resistance. It's worth noting here that follow Jesus is a command just like the others, but it's also a different tense than the other two. Deny self is what's known as the aorist. It's completed action. Take up your cross. It likewise is the aorist. It's completed action. But follow Jesus is the present. It's continual. Keep on following after me. There is a singular moment in which we decide once and for all to deny self, and singular moment in which we crucify ourselves with him. And those two moments are then evidenced in our following Jesus continually. Luke, of course, Luke chapter 9 includes verse 23 of that chapter, the adverb take up his cross daily and follow me. It's a one-time decision. It happens when we're immersed into Christ and baptized for the forgiveness of our sins, and it leads to a daily decision of following after him wherever he leads. Remember we said earlier, we can know geographically about whether or not we follow Jesus by where do we end up. Are we in the same city or the same town that he is? Well, likewise, spiritually, at any point in time, we can ask a similar question. Did I get here by following Jesus? Wherever it is that I am right now, this station in my life, this eating place, this relationship, this habit, this way of managing my time, did I get here by looking at the life of Jesus, by studying his teachings and his commands? Did following him lead me to where I'm at right now? Or did I do something else? Did I kind of pursue what I wanted and keep finding ways to say, well, I'm sure Jesus is okay with this? Did we keep finding justification from what Jesus might allow? Or have I actually sought what he wants based on singular, once and for all decisions that I've made in my past to obey him? Let's listen to I know it's familiar, but listen to the resolute nature of Paul in Galatians 2, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. When did that happen? It was once and for all, completed action. And now he's saying, here's what it's like to follow. It's no longer I who live, but it's Christ who lives in me. It's the life that I now live in the flesh. I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Deny self, take up cross, so that we will daily follow him and be led by him to where he is at. Two final observations from the text quickly. Number three, discipleship is worth it. You hear something that extreme and so radical, the natural inclination is to say, well, what's the takeaway? What's the payoff here? See, we all have the choice whether or not to follow, but he also makes the consequences clear about what happens based on our choice. And there are multiple levels here in which he points to the future. Short-term future, it's going to hurt. But long-term future, verse 25, you'll find your life. You'll seek after spiritual things by losing your life for my sake. You'll find true life. You'll find true meaning instead of pursuing it on the level of the flesh. Paul would use the language of discipleship, 1 Timothy 4. Train yourself for godliness. While bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. Jesus says it'll hurt. It'll be painful, yes. But it is always worth it. You'll find true life. You'll be repaid, is the language of verse 26. When he returns with his angels to the glory of the Father, he will repay according to what he has done. That's technically a neutral statement. It's not positive or negative. It becomes positive or negative based on whether or not we decided to follow after him. For those who denied self, who took up their cross, who truly followed Jesus, it's a day to be, quote, repaid with the blessing of enjoying eternity with him. It's only a horrific day when we choose to reject him. But then final observation, discipleship is worth it. But verse 26 reminds us that you are worth it. Your singular soul is worth deciding, worth choosing. The difficult but rewarding path of following after Jesus. Some scholars portray this text as a chiasm, which means there are mirroring statements, the beginning and the end. And so it's based on time. You've got the very immediate present, verse 24, and then in verse 28, he says in that verse, of course, that some of you will still be alive when I come and establish my kingdom. We know that's Pentecost, Acts chapter 2. So those who are hearing him and that moment will have a short-term payoff in time. But then they will also have a long-term payoff, finding true life, verse 25. Verse 27, the promise of eternal judgment, blessing with him in heaven. And that leaves verse 26 without a mirror. And verse 26 says, what will it profit a man if he were to gain the whole world but forfeit his soul? What will he give in return, in exchange for his soul? What's he saying? That the soul, your soul, is more valuable than you can measure. It's more valuable than you can know. So Jesus is intentionally using this strong, explicit language of crucifixion, denying self, giving us promises of the immediate future and the eternal future to focus our thoughts. We need constant recalibration, resetting of our thinking. And he wants us to see just how valuable our soul is. How valuable your soul is. Far more valuable than any amount of possessions, any amount of weight or mass of the world or the universe. Since nothing is more valuable than my soul, no one is more important than Christ. You won't hear from the Sadducees and the Pharisees how valuable your soul truly is. They'll force you or make you prove it with your actions. They'll make you prove it with obedience to laws that aren't even really laws in order to prove that you're valuable. You won't find the true value of your soul by listening to the voices of the world around you, because they'll just say, it depends on what box you can check when you fill out all those demographic forms. That unless you're an oppressed group, you're not as valuable as you could be. But Jesus, the one who created all of the mass, all of the matter that we know in the world and the universe, the one who hung everything of creation, is also the one who made every cell in your body, and more important than that, the one who breathes a soul into your body, a soul made in his image. So the only one who can determine the value says, look how valuable you are. You're more valuable than all of creation. So don't forfeit it. Don't give it up. Don't forfeit your soul by rejecting me, no matter how difficult it is. And of course, we see his love in this too, because he asked the question, what would a man give in return or exchange for his soul? If you were to, quote, lose your soul, how would you buy it back? And we can never do that. But he gave his life to buy back our soul. He uses that language in Matthew 20. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom. The price to buy back our soul. How valuable is your soul? How valuable is all of our souls? So valuable to him, he said, I will give my life for it. If you hear the beauty of the offer to be the disciple of Jesus Christ this morning, but you've not followed through in becoming a disciple yourself, let today be the day you do that. Deny yourself, take up your cross, because you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Confess that belief, because you're willing to turn your back on your sin, both directly, specifically in the past, but also to turn your back on that lifestyle, that way of thinking, and you're willing to walk in the new direction of life with him. Put him on in baptism this morning. Choose to become a disciple by obeying that command to be immersed. Have your sins washed away. Maybe you need to come back to him as a disciple, one who's not been following after him. You don't have to stay away from him. You can begin that walk anew with him today. He longs to forgive you. If you have any need whatsoever, we're here for you. Would you come as we sing together?